Finally, he's done a video about dot and bubble. Yeah. Hello, my name's Chris, what's yours? Welcome back to my channel, where after every new episode of Doctor Who I am digesting my immediate thoughts about it, alongside doing a marathon of Doctor Who from the very beginning. You're about 5 days late though, Chris. Yeah, I know, for a couple of reasons. Again, I was away for work, and then, I guess, not dreading this, but reluctant to do it. I think while watching this episode I could just foresee the discourse. Now, that isn't to say that discourse is going to differ wildly from most episodes whenever an episode of Doctor Who airs, and more recently in the last few years, any episode will attract just sort of like vitriol. You know, Space Babies, which is a pretty sort of like standard, inoffensive episode of Doctor Who, has got people up in arms about it. This episode was a hard one to assess. I think when I was watching it, I really wasn't enjoying it. There is the idea of this episode that obviously it all hinges on the ending. Now obviously that ending is the most, I think, discussed part of this episode, quite rightly too. But after I watched this episode, I've got a friend who I don't really see much anymore because he moved to New Zealand. He is a university friend. When Doctor Who came back, he had never really seen it before, but fell in love with it, and then became sort of like as obsessive a fan as me, without having the same background in Doctor Who. I used to lend him my DVDs. We used to watch a lot of classic Who for recreation for me and education for him. And after every new episode of Doctor Who, we'll message each other despite being on different hemispheres. And that, I think, is one of the plus points of the simulcast of it dropping at the same time around the globe. I said I didn't really enjoy that episode until the ending, and he replied that he felt that it came out of nowhere. Now, the ending, I don't think, did come out of nowhere. I think it was breadcrumbed, but why did it change the episode for both of us? And I think it's because the desired effect would be that obviously the society being white supremacists should come as a shock, and it should come as a shock whenever you discover it. So like, some people I think have said that they didn't realise it until it's laid out for them in that final scene, and that is the case for me as well. However, I did notice fairly early on in the episode that Lindy's bubble was very white, and then that coupled with her reactions to the Doctor, so the pretty much instant block the first time she sees him, and then when she sees him again the second time and then says, "Oh, I just thought you looked the same," that's when I started to realise there was something sort of like, there was something race-based going on in the episode. But I thought Lindy was a racist. Bearing in mind, all we're seeing is her bubble. Yes, we do see some other people walking around. And I guess whether or not it's a case of did I notice, I think it's more to do with the fact that I'm still focused on Lindy's bubble. And because it's Lindy's bubble that we're seeing, and everything we see pretty much is through Lindy's eyes, I didn't twig that it was a society with those principles. I just thought Lindy was a racist. And that meant that not only was I then watching who I thought was a racist, which turns out she was. She was vacuous and shallow And the shallowness is also breadcrumbed as well, in that she's just shallow and then it becomes sinister. It's one of the best days of my life, despite people being eaten all around her. And then obviously when she throws Ricky September to the dot, it is like a progression. That didn't feel like it came out of nowhere. It just felt like I spent the entire episode disliking her, and that is an issue when it comes to enjoyment. So when I watched the episode, I couldn't stand her, and I know you're not really meant to, but I couldn't see anything redeeming there at all. Even if I started to feel sorry for the predicament that she was in that she had to avoid these slugs, she was still fundamentally unlikable, with the uneasy suspicion that she was a racist. So I'm then just watching an episode that I'm really not enjoying. The ending changed it for me for two main reasons. The first one is that it recontextualized what I'd seen up until that point. Now, I'm glad that I stuck with it for it to do that, but if I was of the mindset, if I didn't like Doctor Who, if I wasn't a huge fan and I was just watching it out of curiosity, and that was the first episode I watched, I'd not be keen, and I might have switched off. But I'm really only going on how I felt watching it. I was like, this is on par for being the worst episode of the season, of this new era so far. But then when the ending comes along, it does recontextualize it to the point where the episode was like cleverer than I'd given it credit for. I wouldn't say any more entertaining, because I still like have that feeling of not enjoying watching what transpired up until the ending. And then the ending was it a shock? I think it was a surprise that it went there and committed like it did. The idea, like, bearing in mind, I already thought that Lindy was a racist based on what I'd been watching. So to find out that it was the society that had those principles and not just her, wasn't expecting that. Then it gives you that sort of like slight unease. But I guess, and this is where it gets tricky here, because the society's wiped out. I know there's a few survivors, but you've got all the people in Fine Time that are getting eaten. But then Ricky September discovers that the homeworld is devastated. Population 0. They are all gone. So that is a huge humdinger for Doctor Who to drop. By them finding out that they hold the principles that they do, does that cushion it that they're a society of white supremacists? Now, is it just that Fine Time are the children of white supremacists that have been sent there because they're obviously aware of people of colour? They're obviously aware that non-white people exist. When Linda's reaction to the Doctor and the other two characters at the end, their reactions to the Doctor aren't bafflement and bewilderment. They know they're there. This is based on hatred rather than ignorance. So, what I'm saying is the society on the homeworld, we don't know whether that was entirely white supremacist. The presence of them finding out that the homeworld was devastated, landed as a kind of a heavy shock. Then finding out that what we're dealing with is a sort of society of white supremacists. Does that soften the blow? Because it feels like the script wants it to, but again, like I say, we don't know whether the entire society on the homeworld were. It's left unspoken. What is crystal clear and what matters is that the people that we're left with will not let the Doctor save them, and that's the second reason why the ending changed it for me, because I think the confusion being that, this episode was sort of expected to be a commentary on the addiction to social media, which, by the way, I still think it was. Not entirely, obviously. I'll grant you, not entirely. There are far bigger things that this episode plays with and discusses. But that idea of social media addiction is still present. Whether or not it's even the third most important thing, it is still there. So to have that being the expectation going in, and then it nominally playing out like that, the revelation that they are such hateful people does imply that the episode is therefore a commentary on this society, which I guess it kind of is. It's offering up a potential danger of living in your bubble. But what this episode is most a commentary on is the character of the Doctor. And I think because of that, because I see it as a commentary on the character of the Doctor more than on the society we're presented with, I really like it. Because what it says about the Doctor is that he will save the lives of anybody in danger, even if they may hold what's considered to be like abhorrent principles and beliefs. And I will take the 15th Doctor pleading with people that hate him because of his skin colour to save their lives, to let him save their lives. I'll take that over the 12th Doctor punching a racist after telling his companion of colour that she's got a temper. I read a great take on this from a black fan who was still not taken with this episode as a commentary on this. I think punching a racist is something that, listen, I hate racists, so am I upset that a fictional one got punched? No, of course not. But this scene goes to show that the Doctor handles things in a different way, and the way the 15th Doctor handles this scene is far more compassionate, mature, and Doctor-like than the 12th Doctor punching a racist in thin ice. That one works as a joke. This one works as a commentary on the character of the Doctor. And if I haven't sung his praises enough already, then Ncuti he's absolutely spectacular at the end here. And what really affected me is that the Doctor didn't seem to understand initially why Lindy and the people of Fine Time had a problem with him, but Ruby got it immediately, and then she gives him and she's cut up about it behind him, and she gives him like the sort of like little touch of reassurance. And when he does get it, and maybe I'm reading that wrong, maybe he got it instantly, and the the frustration came afterwards. But the way I read it is that because the Doctor isn't always black, he just considers himself the Doctor. So to have his offer of salvation rejected quite pointedly as well, I read it that he didn't get it straight away, whereas Ruby did, and that upset me. And because I then had a reaction like this to the ending, which was an episode that I'd sort of like just been watching with fairly shrugged shoulders, because while I thought Lindy was a racist and very unlikable, I was also watching it with sort of like, fairly route one satire and commentary about social media addiction and living in a bubble. It all felt too obvious to me. But then the ending, like I say, it changed that. Could almost give you whiplash if it weren't for the fact that things had been seeded and been breadcrumbed. And so, while I wouldn't say it was whiplash, I would say it's a sharp left turn where all of a sudden you go, oh, obviously we were heading here. And because the ending gave me that reframing and the sort of and it gave me that fairly immediate reaction when I watched it with Millie's performance and Shooty's performance in particular, but also Callie Cook's performance as well. While I've spent this video just sort of like shitting on Lindy Pepperbean, that's not to say that Callie Cook didn't do a great job, because she did. Making Lindy to be like I think probably the biggest monster this series has seen so far takes some doing, and she pulled it off very, very well. By having this reaction to the sort of the final stretch, and I wouldn't say the final act either, it feels less than that, like the final stretch, the final scene essentially, means that I can't write this episode off like I was doing for most of the time while I was watching it. So again, while I still can't say that I loved all of this episode all of the way through, I do think it lives and dies on that ending. And that ending means that I can't write it off completely. So therefore, it took me a long time to work out what I thought. Longer than any episode of the season so far. And while I don't think it's the best episode this season, and while for most of it I was watching it thinking it was going to be the worst, I don't think it's the worst episode either. But what it is like it's not even a game of two halves, but there's so much going on here that it doesn't coalesce into what I think could be either a brilliant episode or a bad one. The brilliant bits are brilliant, superb, and the not so good bits are I'll stand by, sort of like fairly route one and boring. And having Lindy Pepperbean carry the whole thing and be that unlikable like is a challenge for enjoyment. I think rewatching it knowing everything will be a different experience, but I still suspect that the final scene will still be the jewel in the crown, regardless of what foreknowledge of it will do to the rest of the episode. So because of that ending, which means that this episode is the one that has stayed with me the most, while it might not be the best, while it might not be the worst, it is the one I don't think I've stopped thinking about since I watched it. And what that does for this series and for this new era is that I have to say it's more challenging than I expected. This is not what I expected when I heard Russell T Davies was coming back to Doctor Who. And because of that, I'm glad that I'm being kept on my toes. I'm glad that I'm not getting the episode I expected each and every time. The only episode where I got what I expected was probably Space Babies. I think The Church on Ruby Road wasn't what I expected, even though I didn't really love it. The Devil's Court, again, wasn't really what I expected, and I didn't really like it. Boom. I think Boom might have been pretty much what I expected. And then 73 Yards most definitely wasn't. And then this one, absolutely not. I think this is the most Doctor Who has pulled the rug from under me and surprised me in this new era. And so I can't really write it off, you know. I do think that the satire about addiction to social media, which, you know, it does exist as a commentary on that. It's too there. The idea of a bubble can relate also to being like living in an echo chamber of the same beliefs, rather than a social media bubble. But those echo chambers of beliefs manifest through social media in the world we live in. So I don't think you can ignore social media as an ingredient in this, and a fairly vital one as well. So this idea of being addicted to it and where we might be going, it did feel quite pointed. It didn't really say anything new. What it did do, come the end, was introduce very, very unsavoury beliefs into a family show. And it was therefore heavier than I expected. But in an episode that I hadn't really thought was exploring a concept deeply enough to then prove me wrong that it actually was, and to do so quite so heavily, and to commit to it and see through to the ending that those people do not go with the doctor does not convince them to let him save their lives, the doctor loses. That's how it feels. The doctor sees winning as being able to save their lives, and they won't let him. And so they go off. He doesn't save their lives. And that feels like the doctor loses. To end like that, even just on narrative terms, forget the commentary, and I'm sure that there are people that were watching it that hated it for even mentioning the idea of racism, because anything that mentions racism is one too many mentions about racism, and oh god, do we have to see this? Doctor Who is not the place for this. Shut up. But racism is a huge issue facing modern life. It's a huge issue that's faced all of human life, and we really should have sorted it out by now, and we haven't. And that's to our shame. And the fact that it could still very realistically be a continuing issue for the rest of human existence is a bleak thought, but it is one we have to ponder if we're ever going to sort it out. Now, if you don't think racism needs to be sorted out, you should probably have a look at yourself. And so when Doctor Who introduces these things, it is meant to be uncomfortable. And I love that it lent into that. It didn't shy away from that. And, sure it did provoke some difficult conversations in living rooms around the world, but those conversations maybe need to be had. And, Doctor Who's as good a platform as any to introduce these issues. Doctor Who's always done that. Doctor Who's always introduced issues to its viewers, be they environmental, be they sociopolitical, be they geopolitical. It will always do that. Not every week, and it shouldn't do it every week. But when it does do this, it isn't a failing. When it does do this, it's Doctor Who making use of tools at its disposal to highlight some very real issues. Now, what is the argument for the opposite? Is the argument for the opposite that this is virtue signalling? Because if it was virtue signalling, then the Doctor would win, right? The Doctor would be able to talk them round. They'd realise that they're wrong to judge him by the colour of his skin. They don't do that. The Doctor is the victim of racism, and the episode ends. This is pointing out the change in the Doctor's appearance far more pointedly than I thought they were going to. Ordinarily, when the Doctor changes, they regenerate. They do make mention of it if they come across a character they've met before, or the companion will do so. But on the whole, when the Doctor changes from white man to white man, he can have adventures exactly the same. I thought it was a little bit of a missed opportunity when Jodie Whittaker took over, that they didn't lean into that side of things a little bit more. They did in The Witchfinders, but I do think actually an episode that gave Jodie the kind of material that this episode gives Ncuti could have been quite powerful. Whether or not you think Jodie could pull it off, that's not a discussion for this episode. I personally think she could have, but they give it to Ncuti. They didn't shy away from it. Ncuti knocks it out of the park, and we're left with an episode that ends as far away from how it starts as you can imagine. It starts all bright colours, brightly lit, super happy, dot, bubble, good morning everybody, you look amazing, blah blah blah. And then it ends like that. And it doesn't end like that out of nowhere, it progresses to that. And so that's why, like I say, I keep saying, I'm not going to write this episode off. I did not enjoy it for most of it. But that final scene does recontextualize it in certain ways. Whether or not, and I don't know, but everyone's different, aren't they, when they realised what we were dealing with. So, like I say, I thought that it was just Lindy that was racist. We get to the end and we realise the society is. So, at some point, basically viewers that are white, whether or not we're aware of our white privilege, will have been surprised by this episode at some point. At some point when we figured out what we were dealing with, it forces you to consider and think back to, I guess, the extent of that white privilege. Now, some people don't like the term white privilege. Those people do tend to be white. White privilege doesn't mean you live a privileged existence. White privilege means you don't have to walk around thinking about your race. You haven't historically lost out in society because you are white. And I do understand what Russell T Davies was trying to do, even though he did seem a little bit pleased with himself in The Unleashed, where he says, when you realise that's what it is, you have to ask why you hadn't noticed, which I think is a little bit, considering some of the scripts that he's written for the show before, and in terms of representation, again, admittedly, in his first era, not this one, and I know TV's moved on a long way, but I think the episode was structured cleverly, and I do think it's achieved what it seems like he set out to do. I still might not think it did it as well. Maybe it could have. So you see, I always go back to the feeling I had when I was watching it for the first 3 quarters, which was, had it been done differently, would I have enjoyed it up until the point and still felt the effect of the ending? I don't know. It's really this is what I mean. This is why it's taken me a while to do this video. I still really, as I'm talking it through, not necessarily change my mind, but keep asking myself other questions. Like, if the episode had given me a little bit more scope to like Lindy Pepperbean. Do you know what I mean? Like, let's say, for example, because I really hated the joke that she couldn't walk without the arrows. But if, let's say, for example, if there were moments in the episode where I felt sorry for Lindy Pepperbean, which there were not, but if there were, would that have delayed would I then have had more of an argument with myself, which is, I think she's racist. Oh no, maybe she isn't. If I'd have had that, then I think maybe I would have liked the episode more. But instead, what happened was, she's exactly the stereotype I thought this episode was going to give us. Oh, and I think she's racist too. Like, it just made it not fun to watch. And I think the first bit of that episode is meant to be to lull you into a false sense of security, whereas I felt like, not necessarily to society, but I felt like there was something sinister about her from fairly early on. And yeah, it was a tough watch to start with because I wasn't enjoying it, and then it was a tough watch because it was for obvious reasons, but in the right way. And so the whole episode made me engage my brain a lot come the end, which I didn't think it was going to do, and I was grateful that it did, because I was watching it going, I want there to be something else. I want there to be something else. I want there to be something else. And then there was something else. And so the episode gave me what I wanted. I think maybe a little bit too late though. But then would it have had as much of an impact if it came earlier? It probably wouldn't have. And that's why I go back to the fact that I think that it could have done more to have endeared Lindy Pepperbean to me. Whole lots to think about, and to be honest with you, I may be thinking about this one even after Rogue, depending on not how good Rogue is, but depending on how light and frothy or heavy and intense Rogue is. I think I might still be thinking about Dot and Bubble even after Rogue, but I was determined to get a video of my thoughts about Dot and Bubble out before Rogue, which is when this video goes up, Rogue will actually be on tomorrow night, midnight Saturday, but I always think of that as Friday night. Friday night is Doctor Who night now. Never thought that would be the case. So there we go, those are my thoughts on Dot and Bubble. I already know that not everyone's going to agree with me, because by being late on this video, not everybody agrees with me anyway. That's sort of the point. If you disagree with me, then I look forward to reading a well-reasoned comment saying so. If you're just going to write one line insulting me, then you're a moron. So yeah, what did you think about Dot and Bubble? Do let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, then I'm also doing a marathon of Doctor Who from the very beginning, just about to finish season 8. John Pertwee's second year in the role. I've got my James Bond marathon starting very, 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 very soon. And then obviously in a couple of days' time, I will be back here with a video digesting my thoughts on Rogue. So if you don't want to miss any of those, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I will see you soon.